History shows us when the two cultures met on the eastern shore, Native Americans and European colonists, conflict was inevitable. It just meant when, how often, and the outcome. Documenting the history reveals many different views, but one thing is certain. Repeated conflicts existed between 1622 with the Jamestown Massacre, when 350 of 1,200 colonists were killed, and the battle at Wounded Knee in 1890, when between 200 to 350 Sioux were killed. However you count, it's over 250 years, which could be considered America's longest armed conflict. Antagonism developed as the Indians steadily watched more unwanted whites move into their land. Even before the formal start of the French and Indian Wars in 1754, skirmishes between the two world powers, France and England, were being played out in the New World. The Indian nations were pressed hard to declare their loyalties and choose who to fight with and who to fight against, French or British. This conflict and forced loyalties were well played out in the film Last of the Mohegans. With the defeat of the French at the end of the French and Indian Wars in 1763 and their departure from the colonies, it was a short 12 years before the Revolutionary War would force the eastern Indian tribes to make a choice once again, this time whether to side with the British or the colonists. Appreciating the important role bravery played within each tribe, they were engaged in conflict with each other long before the Europeans arrived and began their westward expansion. These encounters could be simply to steal horses or to capture members of their historic enemy tribes. Although conflicts with the Indians persisted during the Civil War years of 1861 to 65, they were of secondary importance. At its ending, many of the participants headed west for a new beginning, and increased contact with Indians, more pressure for land to be settled, and an escalation in conflicts. During the post-Civil War period, the Plains Indians really fought two wars. They made efforts to slow down the seemingly endless supply of wagon trains and settlers, seen here in a depiction of a lone wagon of immigrants desperately trying to fight off an attack with a stick. A second war was with the highly mobile U.S. cavalry, as portrayed by John Wayne as Captain Nathan Brittles in the 1949 film She Wore a Yellow Ribbon. The artists of the era were brilliant at creating the enduring image of the cavalry trooper, rakish, bold, and undaunted. The struggle between the U.S. cavalry and the Plains Indians was being portrayed back east. This is a chromolithograph printed in 1899 depicting the cavalry on the chase. The drama and power of a great cavalry charge at full gallop with pistols drawn is captured in this iconic portrayal of the West. The great sculptor Harry Jackson has captured all this, the look, the intensity, and the speed, in his work entitled The Flag Bearer. It took unusual courage to be the flag bearer. You were a marked target, and the carrier knew it. The American flag made a desirable war shirt for any brave who could capture it. And this is a trademark of Harry Jackson's. All this action is balanced on one leg. This is an historically accurate depiction of an engagement between a large U.S. cavalry detachment led by Major Thomas Thornburg in 1879 to force the Ute tribe into an agrarian way of life, a very bad decision that resulted in a full-scale war that became known as the Thornburg battlefield. The major and 11 troopers were killed, giving the government full justification to banish the Utes to a reservation in Utah. We're looking at a study the artist Frank Tenney Johnson executed in preparation for the finished work. A major participant in the Battle of the Little Bighorn was Hunk Papa Sioux Rain in the Face, who honed his warrior skills participating in a masterful ambush, later called the Fetterman Massacre. A detachment of 81 troopers were dispatched from Fort Kearny, Wyoming, to protect travelers on the Bozeman Trail. This was late 1866, a decade before the Little Bighorn, a mixed tribe raiding party of Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho taunted the inexperienced Captain Fetterman into chasing them into an ambush where all 81 were killed, and, as was the practice, their bodies mutilated. This was the largest single engagement loss of the U.S. cavalry up to that point. The elusive ability of the Indian is seen in this very perceptive image of a cavalry officer pondering, where did his enemy go? His scouts tracked him to this spot, but they're not here. It was often a cat and mouse game. Nevertheless, the encounters were real, usually violent and often quick. The U.S. cavalry was aggressive in their pursuit of the Plains tribes. They fought back as any people believing they were fighting for their own land and their way of life. The cavalry troopers were at a disadvantage when on foot, as seen in this extraordinary image of extreme violence. It was very inadvisable to allow oneself to be captured during one of these engagements. Retribution and punishment was usually severe. The capture of combatants resulting from conflict may be acceptable to the artist and public alike. That is what war is. But capture of a woman by Indians was a gruesome but repeated theme throughout the whole westward expansion of the 19th century. Another dramatization shows a daring rescue on July 11, 1869. The Cheyenne chief Tall Bull captured 2 white women, and the 5th Cavalry were chasing the war party. The ever-present Buffalo Bill was, in fact, a scout for the unit attempting the rescue. Cody commissioned the artist to paint the scene as he described it. Years later, Cody reenacted the event in his Wild West show. The event happened, but Cody's role may be a little showmanship. This major work was painted in 1845, entitled Osage Scalp Dance. The central figure, holding his lance up, is preventing the warrior with the war club from delivering a fatal blow, thus leaving the outcome to the viewer's imagination. This work, entitled Captive, was painted almost 50 years later and actually does depict a very real event when a 17-year-old Lorinda Bewley was captured by Cayuse chief Five Crows. The image depicted here, to most white viewers, would be seen as worse than death. History up to the mid-20th century shows when conflict emerges, larger numbers and better technology always wins. We referenced a number of battles between Native Americans and Anglos. This is a list of the 30 most important conflicts that occurred between 1622 and 1898, according to historians. Military records define 160 such conflicts, and quite likely there were more. Our 6th episode explores the making of a warrior in Native American culture and features the sculptor Dave McGarry with several works depicting famous warriors.